We're on, Angela.
A very good afternoon and welcome to the fourth ConeX Portal LinkedIn live session. Today I'm very pleased to welcome our special guest Luke Appleby from Equilibrium Risk, and as usual we're joined by a panel of members from ConeX Portal. We have Lisa from Confident Costing, Rav from 4 Cubed, and guiding the ship once again is Adam Payne from Factory IQ. Don't forget, if you'd like to comment on any of the conversations or ask any questions, please pop them in the comments box and we'll do our best to include them in the conversation. Luke, good afternoon.
Hi, Angela.
Would you be kind enough to tell us who you are and what you do, please?
Good afternoon. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming along, you guys. My name's Luke, and obviously I'm from Equilibrium Risk, and we are a security management company, and we specialise particularly in creating a secure environment for manufacturers to operate and grow. And I know that sort of sounds a bit fluffy and a bit woolly, but what that actually means is we kind of do three things. We look at what the problems are that manufacturers face, or what the problems could be. We find solutions to those problems in the most efficient, cost-effective way possible, and then we manage them and then react to things if and when things go wrong. And we do that across the physical environment, we do that for the cyber environment, and obviously we do that as the people that interact with both those environments. Because I think I think there's one thing we can all agree about when it comes to security is you're only as strong as your weakest link.
Very true.
Now, I'm led to believe we have a number of questions. We have some questions from the panel. So let's go. Angela's asked hers, actually. So let's go, Lisa. Go on, Lisa. Ask your question.
Hi, Luke. Nice to see you again.
Hiya.
So,
Thank you.
I know this and you know this, but I suspect lots of people don't. What makes you different for manufacturing companies who are looking at security?
What makes us different is we are a risk-based security solution provider. So we're not here to sell products. We're not here to sell the latest technology. What we do, we deliver our solutions based on the level of risk, and that's it. I think what makes you different should be really short and to the point. So I'm going to sort of answer it in that one sentence. We are a risk-based security solution provider.
Yeah, and from what I understand around this, Luke, is that this risk side is if you've got a particular asset, you're looking at the asset, getting the data from the asset, seeing what issues that come about from that asset, and then applying that risk back into the business around. So it could be a bottleneck, it could be a machine from a utilisation, all manner of stuff like that, isn't it? From what I understand, from that risk side.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. So it's security risk, but it's assets that draw risk. It's not that you can't look at a business as a whole and say, right, how am I going to protect that asset? It's the assets within a business that attract those risks, and then you sort of look at what things can go wrong, what are the risks against that asset, and then different sort of we grade them according to this sort of different criteria, and then we look at solutions across people, we look at solutions across technology, we look at solutions across the environment, we look at solutions across processes, the way the business operates, to then create that environment. I mean, it's not just about sort of buying technology, buying products and stuff. I mean, you can reduce risk by changing the way a business operates. You can reduce risk by removing that asset. You can reduce risk by moving an asset. There's a lot of different things you can do to achieve the same aim. And to sort of go back to the introduction, it's about finding the most efficient way, the most cost-effective way of reducing the risk. And majority of the time, when you sort of look at, you drill down into what the assets are and what the risks the asset faces, you can you solve one solution, but then it has a knock-on effect, and then you solve multiple solutions at the same time.
That's quite interesting, actually, Luke. Because I wonder how many manufacturers sort of their mindset is that security starts and ends at the gate, and they don't think about the assets and the people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, I mean, there's two ways of looking at you. You either start from the inside. So for me, we start from the asset, so the core, and then we work outwards. Or you can start from the outside and sort of work inwards. But it's especially if you're going to look at sort of security of the works, you've got to concentrate and know what you're protecting. And so from a manufacturing point of view, it might be sort of what is that end product that you're going to deliver and dispatch. You sort of start there, but then you look at what's all the stuff that you use to make the end product. And it might be a piece of equipment that you use to create that stuff. It might be the people that you use to create that stuff. It might be sort of suppliers that you use to create that stuff. And if you sort of talk about suppliers, I think that's sort of quite prevalent at the moment. It's like, well, how is that supplier protected? What are you doing to protect that supply chain, to protect that relationship with the supplier? So it all sort of drills down into creating that asset and for the product at the end of the day. It all sort of ties in together.
It's reminded me, and I'm showing my age here, but I don't know whether you guys remember, there was a song out years ago, I think it was like a country western song, about the guy in America who worked in a car factory, and he built himself a whole new car by sneaking a piece out at a time. Have you not heard of that one?
I haven't got. I'm obviously. I'm just too young, I am, Angela. I don't know any of that. The country and western. Oh my God, definitely not country and western.
It was in the charts. It was very amusing song, but I would imagine it was actually quite realistic, and I should imagine that manufacturers have suffered issues like that before in the past.
Yeah, definitely. Now, before we move on to Rav's question, I'm just going to say, if anybody's got any questions that's watching, put them into the comments, because we both Angela and myself will pick them up and ask Luke. So, Rav, your question.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Luke. Luke,
Hi, Rav.
I read a recent report from Deloitte that said there's been a spike in phishing attacks and ransomware attacks during COVID, and these attackers are impersonating brands, thereby misleading employees and customers. This and what other things do manufacturers need to be aware of? They're the things I'm hearing about. What about other things?
I think so. The report from Deloitte, I think, is like one. In my head, I think, yeah, okay, that's fine. That's just what's happening at the moment. It's all about sort of threat intelligence, and you sort of look at threat intelligence, sort of your known knowns, your known unknowns, and your unknowns unknowns. I mean, the report from Deloitte is your known unknowns. You know something's going to happen. Whatever latest fashion is, okay, they're exploiting COVID, they exploited remote working. We know that the bad guys out there, the villains out there, will exploit anything that's going on in the press. We've got Christmas coming up. No doubt they'll be exploiting things that come out in Christmas for Christmas parties. So it's a known unknown. We know they're going to exploit it. We don't know exactly how they're going to exploit it, but we know there's going to be something around it. So yeah, I think if sort of going back to sort of the risk management process is sort of understanding what the problems are, understanding what the potential problems are. It kind of comes out. You think these things are going to happen. What are we going to do about it? But you think, well, these things are going to happen. We know these threats exist. We know some sort of threat exists, but we don't know exactly what the threats are. And obviously, the unknown unknowns are the things that no one even thought about. No one thought about that happening, which are the sort of the really scary ones. But then that goes back to the asset. They're always after an asset. They're always targeting an asset and looking for that asset. So it's well. You then create your security posture, your security program around protecting that asset, and then building outwards. And things like the sort of the ransomware attacks will sort of get covered up, and as part of your security program will get incorporated into your plan. I think the other thing that I want to sort of bring out in the when you said sort of what can manufacturers be aware of is the idea of security convergence, and it's been around for a while now. But it's the idea that physical security and cybersecurity or digital security, the environments are now colliding, and they're the same. And it's more prevalent in, I think, the manufacturing environment than anywhere else. So you've got your manufacturing processes. They are physical machines that sit in the physical world, but all their intelligence and all their processing stuff is actually digital. So if you look at, say, well, how are we going to protect that asset? We'll go back to assets. How are we going to protect that asset? Well, you've got to protect it on a physical state, and you've got to protect it from a digital state. So you've got to sort of look at those things. And currently, although we're both, everyone's nodding heads saying, oh yeah, of course you do, of course you do. But in actual fact, when we look at those solutions, we're looking at two different solutions. We're looking at a physical solution, and we're looking at a digital solution or a cyber solution. Well, you think, well, if we're looking at an asset, we need to bring those solutions together. We need to provide a single solution for that one asset rather than looking at two different things. And I think a simple way to bring it to light is, if we are looking at a machine and the process and the program of that machine, then surely we can find a way, or we can get a proximity detector in place where someone has to be there physically to then alter the program of that machine. So you tie those two in. Without the physical proximity there, no one can alter the programming, and vice versa. And I mean, there's 1,000 different ways you can do it, but I think that's a simple one to bring into someone's mind. They can actually think, well, actually, yeah, that's a joint up solution for one problem.
So on that, sorry, go ahead, Lisa. Go ahead.
I was just thinking, I did see today that there was an article around whether the IT department is dying. So if you're talking about virtually outsourcing IT becoming a thing, then I guess you're going to have more instances of remote access to change programming on equipment. So it adds another layer of complexity to something that's already really complex.
Yeah, I disagree with you. It depends on what you class as IT, I suppose. I mean, if you class information technology or operational technology, they're sort of two different things, but they're the same thing at the same time. I think everything is becoming IT. So whatever your job you do, it's based around technology, information technology, operational technology. So maybe the department, as we see at the moment, is dying, but in actual fact, it's not. It's expanding into every single department, everywhere along the supply chain.
Rav, go on. You were going to say something.
Just with regards to the risk-based approach. I mean, in my profession, projects, we look at risk, we look at severity, we look at probability. I mean, we've got all these different security risks. How do you prioritize them? How does your risk-based approach work? Because especially SMEs, larger companies have got bigger resources, smaller companies have got finite resources. You can't cover all the bases. So how do you go about doing that?
So yeah, I mean, so the basic risk or raw risk, you think, well, you look at what the probability of something happens and what's the impact of something should it happen, and you sort of put on a graph and you sort of work out. You might give it a number, you might give it a high, low, a low, high, low, medium, high. You might give it a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the same with the sort of likelihood of it happening. I mean, the impact of it happening. If it happens, what's the impact on the business should it occur? And once you've got that raw risk level, it's then you've got to then look at the vulnerability of that asset. So how is it protected? I mean, is it extremely vulnerable, or is it protected quite well? And once you then take your original sort of raw risk, you then overlay that across your vulnerability risk, you then get sort of a high priority to low priority. And that's one way of saying, because risk is risk, and you think, well, that's the highest risk, but you've got to try and then prioritize, take that next step. And one of the ways is trying to find out how vulnerable that is to a target. But it might be a case of, well, that's a really attractive target. So for example, cash, you might have lots of cash on site. Cash is a really highly sought after item because it's easy to use, whereas a machine, for example, a machine in a factory might not be that highly sought after because you can't exactly pick it up and move it. But then so you look at sort of how vulnerable it is to attack, and that's the way you can sort of grade your high priorities or your highest priorities to your low priorities, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. And
now there's one question I think both Mark Bond and Sam Bainham were going to ask was, what's the most common type of security threat that you're seeing or that manufacturers are facing?
People stealing pens. I'm being slightly facetious, but I think it kind of highlights the points. It's like people like people, you can never find a pen when you need one because people always take them. But the point is that happens all the time. But does it register on the risk scale? No. I mean, can you imagine sort of manufacturers saying, well, actually, we don't want any. It kind of sort of gives you an idea of risk appetite. Are we going to sort of prevent people stealing pens? Well, no, because to prevent that, it means people go to the stationery cupboard to sort of sign out a pen. Here's my daily pen, and sign that for use, then sign it back in at the end of the day. So it sort of gives it, that's the most common, which is a stupid question, really. Like, what's the most serious risk? And it's sort of, there's a difference between threat and risk. Threat is just the probability that something will happen. A risk is the probability of the impact. The biggest risk manufacturers face, I would say, is probably sort of ransomware at the moment, because it's very high return on investment for the ransom people that create these ransoms and distribute them, and really sort of I think there's what's the word, and there's a big impact for manufacturers. I mean, I think there's a sort of recent poll out, and you think, well, a manufacturer is quite easy to pay 500 quid just to release their data, for example, and then won't report it, and you think it's quite what's the word, easy to absorb £500 and it's over and done with. But in actual fact, when you look at that sort of thousands of times a year, and I think there's over half of manufacturers have faced some form of ransomware attack, the sort of numbers soon add up.
Andy Sousa's just put, I have a roll call on my pens every week. That's what he's put.
I was just going to say that one, yeah. And it's quite interesting, actually, because, I mean, how many times, and I'm sure we've all experienced it, how many times do you go to the stationery cupboard and there's no post-it notes, there's no highlighters, there's no pens? Yeah, I wonder where all those go to.
And Rams put, Luke nailed it. Probability is the word. We live in a world of probabilities, but expect certainties. So, yeah.
Good point.
I suppose my question for you is that I haven't asked you is why manufacturing?
A couple of reasons, actually. Firstly, I think manufacturing is great. I think the manufacturing is sort of the backbone to the UK, and it's one of the, in my opinion, it's one of the pillars that makes Britain great. I've had the opportunity to travel the world, both when I was in the army and I left, and seeing the UK from outside looking in. Like, people really think UK manufacturing is brilliant, and it's what, like I say, it's one of the pillars that makes Britain great. And so when I was in the army, you sort of serve overseas and you fight for Britain's interests overseas, and you sort of lose friends and colleagues and stuff. And so being out of the army, I think if I want to continue that, look after Britain's interests while I do this, I want to make, if I can play my little role in making Britain great, making UK great, then I think I can do well. I think it's a good cause for my eyes. The second one is, I think protecting a manufacturer is not easy. I think it's challenging. I think there's so many different things that come into play. It's not just a case of sort of one aspect of a manufacturing organization. You've got the people, you've got the real estate, but then you've got the machinery. It sits in both the physical domain and the digital domain, and you've got people interacting with all that as well. So to create that environment that makes a manufacturing better, that makes the manufacturing process improve, is really challenging. So it's something good to get your teeth into. I think anyone can do security. If you look at security as a series of barriers, let's just stop that. But I think the difference between security and good security is making the business better because of it. And so I think, for me personally, I think it's something that I feel I can make an impact on.
I think the thing that really struck me was we had a conversation probably 6 months ago, Luke, and we were just talking about generalities, and it was your approach to bringing automation into security. It was a 5-minute segment of what we talked about, and it was absolutely fascinating. And that completely switched the way I think about security in the manufacturing world.
You mean automating security or securing automation?
Well, what we were talking about was using automation as a way of reducing the impact of risk that had been identified, but that's just getting into the very detail of the conversation.
I'm not sure I can remember that conversation, Lisa.
There's no point in me asking the next question. Was go on then. Someone like conversation.
It's that cold, Luke. It's bunged your brain up. That's quite interesting, actually, Lisa. That's probably quite an interesting topic of discussion, definitely. And Luke, sorry, go on, Lisa.
No, continue. Sorry.
I was going to say, Luke, I mean, obviously at the moment, everybody's shouting about carbon footprint, sustainability and what have you. How does that enter into what you're actually doing? Does it impact your business at all, or not?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of crossovers. I think sort of environmental security as a whole affects every business. I think more so than in manufacturing sector than everybody else. But I mean, we as a business, we try and implement the UN sustainability goals. We try and implement that into how we operate and the way we go about business. But then for manufacturers considering security, I think securing that environment, and we're talking. I mean, you talk about climate change and the use of energy and stuff. I think it goes into a wider picture, doesn't it? So if you're looking at securing the environment, it goes in. It has fingers in all these little pies that you need to consider to create that environment, create that security, I suppose.
I guess as well, it's even things like, when you look at risks faced by manufacturers, we've heard in the past of where liquids have been dumped into rivers by accident or what have you. Does that form part of what you actually do, looking at those sort of risks?
So going back to threats, and when we talk about sort of threat assessments with RAV, you can go into a lot of detail about what threats a business face or a manufacturers face. But I mean, in the simplest form, it only faces 4 threats. It faces an internal threat, so someone from within the organisation. It faces an external threat, so someone from outside the organisation. It faces a malicious act, so someone doing things on purpose to derail a company, and it also faces an accidental threat. So you look at those 4 threats, really, that sort of encompasses everything. So when we look at a risk assessment and looking at what the potential problems are, we kind of group those into 4 threats, and accidental things like people sort of doing things stupidly or accidentally would fall into that. Yeah, there's an argument to say, well, you can have an external person in cahoots with someone that's working internally. So, like, for example, if they're in a relationship or something, but it's the fundamental forms. It's just those 4 threats that we look at.
Yep. Excellent.
Can I just jump in and ask a related question? So earlier on we spoke about continuity plans. So yeah, putting things in place if things happen. So not going backwards, just making sure the business can continue to operate. Just a line to that. If you have a continuity plan. So I've worked with a business where one of the major risks was that the whole system, the operating line would go down. And what would they do if the operating line went down? If the machinery went down, everything went down, what would they do? And the continuity plan would revert back to a paper-based system. So obviously they had to put things in place where you got paper, etc. All the things align with paper, and that doesn't necessarily align with environmental, bring it in paper and all the sustainability things in there. How does that sit with when you look at continuity plans and the wider kind of solutions?
I suppose for me, I mean, so dealing with that risk, then you're looking at sort of reducing 3 things, aren't you? Really, you're looking at reducing the impact event. So what can you do to reduce the impact? So if it does happen, how can we prevent the seriousness of it occurring? So you might have some redundancy in place, have an alternate machine, for example, in place, and should it happen, or have a machine in place that we can get in within sort of 24 hours. I think Alan before spoke about sort of the hidden factory. So when a factory is operating at 50% or 25%, in actual fact, that we might have that as a security plan. Let's have the factory operating at 75%. So if something happens and a machine's taken offline, for example, we can then upscale the other machines to 100% and reduce the impact of that event occurring. I would then say, well, let's look at what the likelihood of the event occurring. So, I mean, whatever the scenario you're looking at is, so what is the likelihood of this happening? So, say, for example, a ransomware attack. So, Weir Minerals, for example, it's recently in the news, had a ransomware attack, took most things offline, and I think we're at 60 million and counting. So, how can we reduce the likelihood of that occurring? Well, we can put in staff training, for example, which is a good one to say, right, let's make staff aware of what a ransomware attack looks like. We can then put in some sort of technical controls around identifying what a ransomware attack looks like and that sort of stuff. So you're sort of building this picture up, and then we'll look at how to reduce the vulnerability should it happen, and then once you've sort of done that, you then sort of building layers of security against that occurring. One of the things is quite regularly missed when you come to like security program is that recovery. So how do you recover quickly? And there's you can recover quickly by stopping event happening, or you can recover quickly by doing something different. So a lot of emphasis needs to be saying, well, how can we recover, stop the adverse effects happening, and then start again to get the business up and running as quickly as possible. And there's lots of different strategies you'd go around it. And yep, maybe paper-based is one of those things. Like the idea of saying, well, let's have some PCs set aside for if it does happen. Well, the problem with that is if you have a set of PCs set aside, as soon as it does happen, you've got these PCs, you blow the dust off them, turn them up, and it spends 3 days updating. Or you think, well, let's have a set of radios, because if the phone lines go down, let's have a set of radios aside for one, so we can then communicate. And again, your phone lines goes down, you turn up these radios, and the power's off. So you've got to sort of recreate your redundancy. You've got to create your continuity plan, more or less parallel with your operational plan. So you've got to include it in what you do as a ConeX Fed. You can't have a file that says, here's our continuity plan. In essence, is right, take it out and blow the dust off it and say, right, what do we need to do it? You've got to try and keep it as close to your operational norm as possible.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we are drawing to a close, but before we finish, can I ask you, Luke, if you could give one piece of advice to SME manufacturers, what would that be?
Don't start spending. Well, I've got 2 bits of advice. Don't start spending money. I think people have a tendency to think, right, well, I've got this problem. What can I buy to fix that problem? And it's not necessarily the case. It's about sort of understanding that risk and trying to find the root cause of the problem, and then go from there. I think I've mentioned that you can. There's so many things you can do to reduce that risk without spending money. You can remove an asset. You can change the way a business operates, for example. There's lots of different things you can do. And the other thing is don't bury your head in the sand. I think there's a big tendency to people think, well, you identify risk, you've got to spend money to fix it. Well, it's not a case. It's actually the opposite. The more aware you are of the risk, the more understanding you are of the risk, the less it's going to cost you in the long run.
Wise words indeed. Well, that's all we have time for today, but please do connect with Luke to find out more about how Equilibrium Risk can help you. People can connect with you on LinkedIn here, Luke, and obviously you've got your website as well. Once again, I'd like to thank all of our guests for joining us, and of course thank you to those of you who commented and asked questions. If you'd like to know a little more about fabulous work ConeX Portal's doing and how it's helping SMEs in the UK manufacturing, please do either contact Sam Bainham or myself. Thank you all for watching, and look forward to seeing you next week when we'll be back again on Tuesday and Thursday for another LinkedIn Live session. Bye.